Hello, we're going to go over Chapter 9, Campaigns and Elections. This is a review of the first part of this PowerPoint, so if you have it, please get out your highlighter, etc., and we will run through the slides. The first thing, remember, as we look at this, understand how candidates are nominated in the presidential process. We're going to look at the electoral process overall, and then I will do a separate video on campaign finance. One of the first things I want to look at is an overview for running for president. I gave you a handout a little bit ago that is sort of like a maze or a race, but let's just go over the main ideas here. About a year or two before you want to run for president, you need to get mentioned, and this is including anything from organizing your campaign to forming a presidential committee to see if you have what it takes to run for office, and especially the support. So that happens, really we're in that stage right now for the 2016 presidential race. In the spring, before a president is elected, and I'm going to go ahead and open these. In the spring, before you're elected, what's going to happen between January and June will be the race for delegates. So once you get mentioned, the second phase is competing for delegates. And how you do that is through a presidential primary or an area caucus. And remember, another meaning for that word is a meeting. Another meaning is meeting. Primaries are intra-party nominating devices, and that's how voters tell each party who they want, and that's held in the spring. They have to mobilize party activists. Anytime you have a primary, those are people loyal to the party who are going out to vote to tell the party who they want as their candidate. When people in a primary or vote, they really are nominating a delegate. And a delegate is someone who attends a convention and votes for that person to receive the nomination. The next phase that will happen once the primary and caucus season is over is we will have a national convention. And this is very much like a pep rally to introduce the candidate for the first time. And by that, I mean the president and the vice presidential candidate. And this kicks off the last stage known as the general campaign. And that is from August to November. A campaign strategy for the candidate is what works in the primary may not work in the general election. Candidates often have to move toward the center, and we have talked about that before, to appeal more to an independent voter, because many times independent voters are the ones who are going to swing the election. So that's a general overview. I'm going to go in specifics a little bit more as I take you through this first part of the slide. Deciding to run can be very difficult. Normally what we see is when a person decides to run, more often than not, they are a senator or a governor. Oftentimes, like Paul Ryan, who was a vice presidential candidate in 2012, he was a member of the House. But if you have good name recognition in the Senate, like Senator Mitt Romney, or Governor Bill Clinton, or Governor George Bush, that's normally what happens. Deciding to run can be very difficult, but campaigns are physically and emotionally taxing. Other countries have very short campaigns, and this is a comparison. Some are generally less than 2 months, and if you look at ours, sometimes that can be 2 years. It's very, very long. Ours typically lasts 18 months or longer. The definition for a nomination is the official endorsement of a candidate for office by a political party. Generally, success requires momentum, money, and media attention. That's why it's often good to be a governor or a president or somebody who has sponsored major legislation. If you go back a little bit, Jimmy Carter was a governor, Ronald Reagan was a governor, George H.W. Bush was in Congress and also was a vice president. And then, of course, I've already named the other current ones. President Obama was a senator for a short time. One thing that people focus on is the campaign strategy. That is the master plan candidates lay out to guide their electoral campaign. You have to figure out what states you need to win in order to capture the nomination. So people not only have an accountant, they have lawyers, they have campaign strategists who they hire to help map out their game plan. I've told you already about Living Room Candidate. That's where we did some of our campaign ads and watched some of them. So a campaign strategy, do you need to target elderly voters? Do you need to focus on a minority group and try to get their vote? Do you need to go for a women's vote? Do you need to focus on the East Coast, West Coast, the Midwest, the Rust Belt states, the Sun Belt states for the elderly vote, etc.? Competing for delegates is a very difficult process because there are two systems that exist in the presidential road. The Iowa caucus is the most famous. There's only two states that do this, Texas and Iowa, but the Iowa caucus is one of the very first states to have it. And we've talked about this term called front loading, where candidates gamble and states want attention, so they front load the primary to try to be first. The advantage of this is you get built-in media attention, and if you win, it tells people that you are a serious candidate. The caucus is a meeting of state party leaders used to select delegates that is held in a precinct, and many times it's a house or a church, wherever the precinct is located. People meet and really try to decide by arguing and discussing who the delegate, who the person is who should receive the most votes. It's organized like a pyramid from local precincts to the state convention on how delegates are eventually nominated and are able to attend the national convention. This process, the caucus, is not used by many states, and Iowa is the first and considered the most important, or one of the most important races in the bid for the presidency. The next portion in competing for delegates is the primary road, and the top billing for the primary goes to the state of New Hampshire. They are a very small state, but they've been pretty accurate when you look at a span over 100 years on picking the candidate. So normally you can tell if somebody is bound to run for the presidency if they start to visit Iowa or New Hampshire. Now the primary road, again, a primary is an election in which voters choose the nominee or delegates pledge to the nominee who they want to run for president. So if I cast my vote for Barack Obama, then delegates representing Barack Obama will attend the convention. It was started by turn-of-the-century reformers. Most states use one of the forms of the primaries listed. And the big thing about these is these were done in secret. And this was one of the first times, so you wouldn't be pressured in a meeting like a caucus system, or by party bosses who would then tell you who the nominee is. This became a very popular choice because it was done in secret. Now, front-loading is a tendency of states to hold primaries earlier, which I just mentioned. And again, New Hampshire holds it. And many times, it's sort of like that frog-hopping, states will try to hold it first. Generally, primaries serve as elimination contests because once a person has won one of the major party nominations, then the race and the infighting within a party is over. This is a list, and you can look at this. Missouri is right here. This was in 2008, but we held ours in February. And what you might note is that states were tired of New Hampshire and Iowa getting all the attention. So many southern states voted in what we call Super Tuesday. And Super Tuesday was an election on one day in which 8 or 9 southern states all held their primary in order to vote for their candidate. And it gave the southern bloc a little bit more pull in the presidential race. You can see it goes from January to May. I've shown you the delegate count, so I'm going to go over. The nomination game, this chart I thought was really interesting, is the inflated importance of front-loading Iowa and New Hampshire. This is a disproportionate view of the United States and how important those early primaries are, because if you don't win the Iowa caucus and you don't win New Hampshire, more than likely you're probably going to fall out in terms of money and support. Other large ones, you can see Texas, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, New York. These are other states who tend to get a little bit more billing and free media time. So competing for delegates is very important. Just a little bit of feedback and we'll end this part. It is a disproportionate amount of attention on the early ones. That's why states like Michigan in 2012 tried to go earlier than Iowa and New Hampshire, and they were penalized for it from the Democratic Party. Prominent politicians find it very difficult to make time to run. Sometimes a very popular senator might find themselves more effective in the role as a Senate than it would taking 2 years out of his time to run for president. Money plays a very big role. It takes, just for the general campaign alone, from August to November, it can take anywhere from $80 to $100 million just to run a 2 to 3 month campaign. So if you are going for a 2-year time span, imagine the millions of dollars that you would have to fundraise as a candidate. Participation in primaries and caucuses is quite low and unrepresentative. Again, party activists are the ones who tend to turn out and vote to tell their party who they want as a candidate. Many people believe the system gives too much power to the media, that the media is the one creating the horse race. And remember, we talked about the media being the gatekeeper and the scorekeeper. This again is that horse race mentality. Who is ahead at the end of the day? Who's ahead at the end of the media? And again, it's that scorekeeper function that the media plays that we talked about in our last unit. So that is a little bit on just the nomination portion. I'm going to stop and then talk about the activation of the party. So I hope this helped as a little bit for review.